Hi, everyone. I am Liz Nord, a senior producer here at the Sundance Institute Collab, and I am so excited to welcome you to this Collab Masterclass, an entrepreneurial approach to producing with Jason Michael Berman. I'll bring on Jason in a few minutes, but first, a couple housekeeping items. If you have any connection problems during the session, we advise you to move as close to your router as possible, and sometimes just leaving the meeting and then rejoining will clear everything up. If you're still having problems, you can email collab_courses, COLLAB _courses@sundance.org, and we will try to answer you as quickly as possible. A couple ways the system works. We'll have opportunities for you to ask questions directly to Jason throughout the class today. So when you have questions, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your burning inquiries, and we'll get to them when we can. Try to keep your questions to those that will be useful for the whole group instead of just about your specific project. You will see if we choose your question and we decide to bring you on audio to talk to Jason directly, you should see a small pop-up window that says host would like you to unmute your mic, and you just have to click unmute yourself. And if you can't come on, if you have problems, just let us know in the chat. You have two other buttons down there. There's a hand raise and a chat. Jason may throw out some questions to us as a group, and the chat would be where you can put your answers. So we'll turn that on when he asks for your input. You just make sure that you choose send your chat to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see what you're answering. I will also ask you to stay at the end of class for a few minutes as I have a couple announcements, including a discount code for you for our upcoming creative producing course, which is kind of an 8-week version of what we're doing in 3 hours today. Executive Vice President responsible for producing Mandaluy's entire slate of films. He's produced feature films that have debuted at the premier film festivals around the globe, including one you may have heard of called Sundance, plus Cannes, Toronto, South by Southwest, and all of them. Jason was named in the 2016 Variety Dealmakers Impact Report and in Variety in 2011 as one of the top 10 producers to watch. We're watching. And by Deadline Hollywood in 2012 as one of the top 10 producers to watch at Sundance. He has a long list of films under his belt, and he also helped start the Catalyst Institute, Catalyst Initiative, excuse me, here at the Sundance Institute, which helps connect filmmakers and investors. We are so lucky to have some time with him today, so welcome, Jason. Can you please come on? There you are.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. Thank you, Liz. Thanks for the nice introduction. So as nice to meet everybody. As Liz mentioned, my name is Jason Berman. I am a film producer, originally from Baltimore, Maryland, and moved out to Los Angeles in 2002 to attend the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts. If you guys can pop up that PowerPoint presentation, that would be great. Hopefully it goes into, does that go into full screen? We're trying to see if that goes into full screen or not. I think it will.
We can see it. Yep, it's filling up.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. So yeah, so I attended the University of Southern California. And you guys can go to the next page. Perfect. Yeah. So this master class is mostly going to focus on an entrepreneurial approach to producing. And there's a lot of different approaches to producing. What I am excited about is to talk about an entrepreneurial way. And what I'll start out in saying is that this has, worked for me, approaching it from an entrepreneurial point of view. And what I talk about in this class today and with my guests is going to be what's worked for us, how I've kind of accomplished what I've had so far to date in my career, and same with the two guests that I'm going to introduce you to. And there's a lot of different ways to produce, and everybody kind of has their own journey. But I've always thought that it's helpful to share in the ways that certain people have done things for you guys in your careers, in terms of forging ahead as filmmakers and as creators and producers. So to give a little bit of background, I had done a lot of stuff in middle school and high school in terms of helping to create programs at both middle school and high school, video programs specifically. And so I always loved creating things, making things happen, and pushing projects and programs ahead. Had obviously set my sights on going to film school. Got into USC, and when I got into USC, I learned very, very quickly that producing was my skill set that I was, really good at. In comparison to other colleagues of mine, other classmates of mine, I just don't think I really realized earlier before film school what producing actually was. And when I learned that there was something called a producer and what it was that they did, I realized that that's what I had been doing to date. So I jumped immediately into producing within my summer after my freshman year. And throughout my time at USC, ended up producing 6 graduate and undergraduate thesis films, a couple of which are shown right here. And we did some really ambitious projects in film school, a couple of which we actually shot outside of the state of California with all USC film students. And that was great because it was a real bonding experience. But for people, which usually happens when you're on a distant location making a movie. But one of the things I'll say, and I'll just add this, is that a lot of times people are always figuring out how to raise money for short films. And one of the things that I think that I did in an entrepreneurial way was on the first short film that I had produced, half the crew was grad students and the other half of the crew was undergraduate students. And it was a way for us to set up kind of like this mentorship learning program between freshmen that had just finished their freshman year in film school, and then grad students who were in their, one of their last semesters of grad school, and having the keys on those movies be the grad students, and then the seconds and thirds within different departments being undergrads, and that way, early undergrads, and that way, there could be that educational component. And based upon that, we actually used that messaging to help raise money for the short film from people that liked the idea that we were kind of creating this mentorship program while creating a specific director's short film. So just one example of something that we did in an entrepreneurial outside the box way to help make a film, a graduate thesis film happen. Moving on to the next slide here. After graduating from USC, and I, by the way, I tell you my story in advance of kind of digging into the details here, because I think it just kind of explains how I was, entrepreneurial and approach to ultimately what I'm doing now as a producer. But out of school, I wanted to learn the business side of the industry. I knew eventually that I'd want to jump back to producing, but because I had gotten a really good physical production experience at USC, and also an experience of working with creators on their projects, I wanted to see how the business side worked. So my first job out of USC was at the William Morris Agency, and that was followed by William Morris eventually became WME. That was followed by a little bit over a year working at MGM Studios, as well as, and that was working for the COO of MGM Studios. And I should say at William Morris, I actually worked for the independent film division, which is the division responsible for putting together the client's passion projects in terms of raising financing, getting them into film festivals, and then selling them to distributors. And then after MGM, which was great because at MGM, as I said, working for the head of the company, I got to learn about marketing, business, legal affairs, distribution, all the different things that you did not learn much about in film school, really how a studio operates from the top down. And then after that, I went to go to Universal Studios to work for writer-director Gary Ross, who's made movies, such as Seabiscuit, The Hunger Games, The Free State of Jones, Pleasantville, Big, Dave, a lot of different great films that I'm sure you're all familiar with. And then along the way, while I was in film school too, I had done internships at Sony, internships at Panavision, right after school, while I was doing these other jobs that I just mentioned. On the side, I was helping do some music videos with friends of mine for Island Def Jam and Universal Music Group. So I did a lot of different things, during film school, but also after the first few years after film school, to learn all different sides of the business, and build relationships at all different types of places, which has been really helpful, because now I've been able to kind of pull a lot of them together in terms of pushing projects forward. So I put in my time doing that. And one of the other things that I did after I spent those 3 years doing those various different assistant jobs, we can move on to the next slide, was that I had created an initiative between USC and a company that I had started with a partner of mine from film school called Film Forward Independent. And the whole goal of Film Forward Independent was to help connect graduating students from USC in either the undergrad or grad program, and then partnering them with other people in the industry, whether they were agents, managers, financiers, etc., to help the top level students that were graduating who had great scripts and were ready to go make their first independent films, to help them get those films financed, and we would produce them. And one of the films that came out of that initiative, which I will say we were a little bit ahead of our time in trying to do this. We were trying to go out and raise millions of dollars for this concept. We'd obviously had a great partnership with USC. Was that this was around the time of the economic crash in 2008, 2009. So it was it didn't last long, but we were able to get one movie out of it, and that was the movie Love. And you'll get to meet that filmmaker Sheldon Candice later today. And Love actually premiered in competition at the 2012 Sundance Film Festival and went off to sell and make its investors their money back, and had a really nice release. But other things that I did too during that 2009-2010 period, after I'd done those 3 assistant jobs, was I tried my hand at building partnerships with brands, whether it was Royal Caribbean International, the United States Ski and Snowboard Association, and helping to put together some different reality non-scripted TV shows, and utilizing the resources that I had with different filmmakers, as well as with those brands that I had built up over the years, to try to help launch different shows. Unfortunately, they didn't happen. But it was a really great experience in terms of building relationships with brands and trying to work with brands that are very protective of their image in putting content on the air. And that's something that I've always actually enjoyed about producing, is the relationship building side of it. So that's we can move on to the next slide here. I kind of covered some of this, but working at MGM was great, as I mentioned. In terms of seeing how a studio worked, how a buyer worked, and then obviously working for Gary Ross, who was also involved in this movie called The Tale of Despereaux, was great in seeing how a top-level artist worked. But what I can say is that through those 3 jobs that I did between 2006 and 2009, was I had worked for on the sales side of the industry, I had worked on the buyer side of the industry, and I had worked on the artist side of the industry. With all really great top level people. And so that, combined with the physical production experience that I had at USC, I think definitely added to kind of what I would say a full 360 in terms of really understanding the entertainment business. And at that point in late 2009, we can move on to the next slide. I had gone off to produce my first movie, which was called The Dryland. The Dryland premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2010. I left my job working for Gary Ross to go produce that movie. I took a risk of leaving a job with a decent salary, as well as with health insurance, to go make $7,500 on an independent film as a co-producer. But it was the best decision that I ever made, taking that leap. The film was directed by a filmmaker whose thesis film I had produced at USC, so that relationship was there because of that specific film that we had made in film school. We had put together about $1 million to go make that movie, and shot it in the summer of 2009. And then, as I said, it premiered at Sundance and competition in 2010. And then that launched my producing career. And from that point on, I was able to go make about 15 different independent films over the next 6 years, raising the financing for them, working with filmmakers that I'd either gone to school with or filmmakers that I had built relationships up with through the Sundance Institute. And some of the posters for those films are here. And it's been great. And most of the films that I've done to date have been under $10 million. I just did my first $20 million film, and then just hoping to scale up from there. But what I would say that I've tried to do with my career is to start on the smaller end of things, learn the process very intimately, and in a very detailed way, and then proceed on that journey to starting to do bigger movies. And at that point, when you're doing the bigger films, you really understand the ins and outs of all the details because you've been able to learn them on smaller films. And that has been, I would say, very advantageous for me. And I would definitely encourage people to kind of, look at their approach that way, because it's the best way to learn. And then in 2000, we can move on to the next slide here. And what I'll just kind of add in is, during this time of producing these 15 different movies, I'd been supported by a lot of different organizations. Obviously, I've been supported by the Sundance Institute through their producing program, and have been supported through Film Independent through their Fast Track program, and supported through IFP on their Film Week program that they have. Got involved in the Producers Guild in terms of mentorship, and then recently became a member of the Academy, and am now on a committee in terms of broadening diversity within the Academy membership for the producers branch. And have built really strong relationships with these organizations over the years, in terms of, they've given a lot of support to me, and now trying to give back as much as I can. As Liz mentioned, helped start the Catalyst Initiative at Sundance, which is about connecting creative investors with filmmakers to get Sundance supported labs projects or Sundance supported filmmakers projects off the ground. And so it's been a big relationship aspect. I would say that's part of my entrepreneurial approach, is building meaningful relationships with people as well. So we can go to the next slide. Now in 2015, after about 6 years of being an independent road producer, moving all around the country for different movies, and working out of post houses, not having stable health insurance, and living paycheck to paycheck, I finally decided it would be great to get a job where I could still be entrepreneurial in my approach, and that was really important. I wanted to go to a company that would allow me to kind of run my business and support me in doing it. And Peter Guber, who runs Mandalay Entertainment and has been very successful in the entertainment business for many years, and who now focuses a lot on sports. He still loves movies. He still loves having a film production company as part of his entertainment company. He hired me to run Mandalay Pictures. And I think the main reason he hired me was that he was impressed with how I'd entrepreneurially built my career up over the years, which is, I think, how he built his career up as well. And so I've been at Mandalay for the last 4 years. Since being at Mandalay, we have made 9 films. We're about to go make our 10th and 11th films this coming up summer. The first film I made while I was at Mandalay was The Birth of a Nation, which premiered at Sundance in 2016 and is still to date the highest selling finished film at a festival. And then after that, we've actually gone and made our last 8 films for Netflix, which has been pretty great because Netflix has supported myself and the filmmakers I've produced for, a lot of which have actually been first-time feature directors. I would say 5 of them, I think, have been first-time feature directors on getting their movies off the ground. And those movies have gone on to Netflix. They've been for very specific audiences. And they've done, because of that, they've all had a lot of viewing, which has been great. And so I'm loving my job at Mandalay. We're trying to further expand my division and hoping to do bigger movies, while at the same time still supporting first-time feature directors and getting their films off the ground, and still heavily being involved in Sundance. I also teach at USC, so at USC with filmmakers out of that program as well. And so being a mix between working with more experienced seasoned filmmakers on bigger budgets, but very character-driven films, just within larger landscapes, while at the same time helping young filmmakers get their movies off the ground. And recently, I helped executive produce a short film which premiered at Sundance this year called Lavender, which you will be able to find on the Fox Searchlight social media channels. I'm a really talented filmmaker through the Sundance Ignite program. Matthew Pacini directed that, and so if you get a chance, check it out. It's great, and it should be online fairly soon. And what I'll say before we kind of dig in is that I'm currently talking to you guys from Salzburg, Austria. I've been here for the last week. I am producing a movie called Plane that Timur Bekmetevov is directing. He did Night Watch, Day Watch, and Wanted. Recently financed and produced Searching, which was a big hit at Sundance a couple years ago. He's directing this contained thriller that a college friend of mine wrote. And so we've been out here in Salzburg, Austria, because Sony Pictures, who's making the movie, it's the first movie that I'm making at Sony, has partnered up with Red Bull, because Red Bull has a major flying team called the Flying Bulls, and they have an airport and a bunch of equipment and planes and the best stunt pilots in the world. And so we're actually working with Red Bull to help bring this film to life, and we'll be shooting it out in Salzburg this coming up summer. And even just the way that whole relationship has happened was very entrepreneurial, from both Sony's end and Red Bull's end. And so I'm actually in the Red Bull conference room, and I can tell you I've never seen so much Red Bull in my life. There's Red Bull refrigerators all over the place. Here's some Red Bull cola that they make now, and there's actually even Red Bull water. So there's a lot of Red Bull products, and we're actually at their what they call the Red Bull Media House, which is where they do all their content creation. That's where I'm talking to you guys from. So yeah, that's kind of my story, and I'm really excited to kind of give you guys details on an entrepreneurial approach to producing. So let's get into it. We will go to our next slide here, which is the definition of an entrepreneur. And this comes from one of the dictionaries online, I think it may be dictionary.com. But the definition of an entrepreneur is a person who organizes and manages any enterprise, usually with considerable initiative and risk. And that can be anybody that is associated with any endeavor. I would say on the filmmaking side, it can obviously be a producer, it can be a director, it can be a writer, an all-around content creator. But it is somebody who's taking a chance, what it means to me is somebody who's taking a chance, thinking outside the box, taking on an initiative, and it's risky. Because when you're being an entrepreneur, you really don't know where something is going to land, and but for me, following that path versus just climbing a regular corporate ladder, I have found to be the place where I feel most comfortable. So that's the definition of an entrepreneur. let's go on to our next slide here. So what is, and you guys can you guys still see me as well as okay, perfect. Just want to make sure you can see my face too while I'm talking. But being entrepreneurial, it's something that pushes you to think outside the box. So let's talk about that for a second. And I can give an example of this. When we were making the Dryland, which if you get a chance, it's a film. I think it's still on iTunes. It was the film we had at Sundance in 2010. There was a sequence in that movie that involved a Delta, that involved an airplane that landed, that was landing with a soldier coming home from war who was dealing with PTSD and bringing him back home to El Paso, Texas. And we were an under $1 million independent film. We had some cool actors in the movie, but we obviously couldn't rent a plane to shoot in, and we really wanted, there were no plane sets in El Paso, which is where we were shooting, and we really wanted to get the shot of a plane landing and then a passenger walking off of our lead walking off of the plane. And so we had called Delta, because they were one of the main airplanes that landed in El Paso, and they obviously have a program that really supports soldiers and military, and tried to work through it that way in terms of getting permission that when the plane landed from a flight, that we could hop on the plane really quickly with our cameras in between the time that flight landed and when the next one departed, and get the shot of our soldier walking off of the plane. And so we went through Delta corporate communications to do that. And we kind of got far down the process, and then they came back at the very last minute and they said no. You can imagine there's a lot of insurance and safety risks with this, and this was back in 2009, and if I don't think this would actually happen now, especially with a plane that was active on a runway and was in between a deboarding and a new boarding process. But when they said no, we had an option. The only other thing we could do is have the soldier coming back home to El Paso and being dropped off by a Greyhound bus. And I didn't think that was as cinematic. I wanted the plane landing. I wanted following the soldier off the plane, from behind as he's walking down the aisle, and then up the gate, up the jet bridge, and through the airport. And we had the airport's approval to do this. So when Delta said no, we went back to the airport a couple days later, and we went to meet with the manager of Delta at the station at the El Paso airport. And it was this older gentleman who had been working for Delta for a very long time. You could tell that he was probably getting pretty close to retirement. And we talked to him, explained to him what it was that we were doing, the message that we were trying to make with the film, and would he be willing to support us and circle back with Delta and the Delta corporate offices, and said because he supported it and was able to lay out a plan on a specific flight that he thought worked to do this, where there was enough time, and that the entire ground support at the El Paso airport working for Delta was in favor of this, as was the actual airport itself. Would he be willing to help us? And he was. And this gentleman literally created an entire plan based on the local level of being at the airport, and went back to Delta corporate to present his plan for how he would make this happen, versus it being the other way around, and corporate approaching the local people. It was local approaching corporate. And by doing that, we actually got the answer we wanted. We got the yes. And that added a significant amount of value to being able to open the movie and the opening sequence. And that was outside the box thinking. A lot of people would just go the corporate route. When we went the corporate route, we got turned away, and then we approached it from another angle, and it ultimately ended up working out in our favor. And I don't think they've done it since then, especially not for an independent film group. So, and they allowed us, by the way, to use the name Delta too. And if you watch most movies have to, a lot of movies have to use other airline fictitious names. So outside the box thinking is being entrepreneurial. When you're putting financing together for a movie, and we'll dig into that a little bit later too, that is very involved in an entrepreneurial approach and outside the box thinking about how do you connect certain types of people to your stories that you want to tell so you can get them financed. So it's considering and looking at things from all angles and viewpoints in terms of how to put a project together. Being entrepreneurial, it's creating your own opportunities, forging your own path, as opposed to following opportunities that are created by others. One of the things that I've found in my career is that, when I created opportunities for myself, I was always trying to make them be a two-way street. So if it was an opportunity for me, I wanted it to be an opportunity. What it was that I was creating was also going to be an opportunity for somebody else. So there was a two-way street there. It just wasn't benefiting me. It was benefiting me plus the people that were going to be a part of it. And so everything that I've done has always really been group-based in terms of the opportunity, something that can have a large impact on multiple people. And that is an entrepreneurial approach because, I think there's a lot of people out there that just want to kind of look out for their own opportunity. For me, it's always been about the group, the collective. How can something benefit multiple people? When I wanted to have a video program in my middle school and high school, of course, it was something I wanted, but in the way that I presented it was that it was going to affect a larger group of people, and that I was going to help create those programs that would benefit others. You always want to, when you're approaching things entrepreneurially, you always want to make sure you're looking at what is the 10,000 foot view of putting something together. What are all the pieces that need to happen? Not getting too caught up in the details at the beginning, but really thinking about it from a 10,000 foot bird's eye view, and then very quickly being able to adjust to the details of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, so it's executed the right way. Instilling faith in your creative and financial partners, very important. Anything that you do that's going to be entrepreneurial is generally going to require buy-in from lots of different types of people, your creative partners, as well as people that are obviously going to have to back you. That takes strategic thinking. It also takes a detailed level plan, and a lot of relationship building, as well as being inspirational and showing that you are going to push through any hurdles no matter what, if you're getting people to back you, whether as partners, as a crew, as a team, or people that are going to financially support you. And problem solving and troubleshooting. That is going through hurdles, instead of trying to let a mountain stop you in your way, figuring out how you're going to get around it, either around it or over it. Just being resourceful in an outside the box way in terms of who are people or what are things that can help you in accomplishing what it is that you're trying to do if you're running into issues. And again, that all comes back to just outside the box, creative, entrepreneurial thinking. So to me, that is being entrepreneurial. And what I'd love to ask you guys, and if you, type this into your chat, I think you can, raise your hand or type it into your chat. But what would be helpful to know is from the group of people here, if you've got something that really sticks out that you think that you've done in your life that's been entrepreneurial, work-wise or other, I'd love to hear some things, and we could share them with the group. So if anybody has any ideas, feel free to type them in or raise their hand.
So you all can just click on that little chat bubble at the bottom of your screen and type right into there to answer Jason's question.
Okay, so Leah's currently trying to raise money for a short film to write and direct. That's definitely that is definitely entrepreneurial and taking that feed on. And I think that's Margot.
It looks like Noam
Oh,
Argo.
Noam Argo. Yes, quit my tech job and started my own production company. Definitely, very, very entrepreneurial. Jeff has built a small production company that shoots local commercials and events. Saketa made my first film with crowdfunding, investors, savings, and credit cards to get it done. Just left my job to focus on financing the next one. That's great. Created a live, let's see here. Is that Adriana? EDR? I created a live literary game show that I produced and host that I've taken to 63 cities around the world, called Literary Deathmatch. Somebody else quit their advertising job in Canada to study acting in New York. Definitely. Started a girls group for inner city teenage girls. Yeah, so there's a lot of people on here that are doing some really entrepreneurial pursuits. And that is great. We've got a couple other ones here. Developing my first featured film to go in July in Italy. Sold my tech startup to Google, crowdfunded for my short film, started a production company, raised money for a feature via Seed and Spark, and now working on making a feature happen. I have 2 employees with full benefits and started a film festival for women directors. Awesome. So you got a lot of really great entrepreneurial people on here. And what I would say is I think in 2019, to be, successful in the entertainment business definitely takes an entrepreneurial spirit, no matter what position you are, and that's definitely an opinion of mine. No matter if you're writer, director, producer, actor, cinematographer, it's all about an entrepreneurial approach to making you stick out. And we got one more from Alan. Left the corporate world and constant travel to run my own local company, and now I've started a second one this year. That's great. So yes, you guys definitely are on the path of entrepreneurship in what it is that you're doing, and obviously you're involved in collab. So that's phenomenal. Okay, so let's jump into our next aspect of it, which is going to be picking the right project as your first project. And I'll start out with an overview, and then we'll get a little bit deeper into it. So, first of all, what I would say is that self-awareness of yourself, what it is that you, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, is definitely something good to be aware of when you're setting out to make your own first project. Being aware of of what your best way is to connect with people, to put resources together, crew together, financing together. So definitely understanding what the challenges are, and doing that. Obviously knowing what the benefits are. And just being self-aware about the entire process of setting off on that, to climb that hill of putting your first content project together. Also, thinking about what should that first project be. When I was in film school, a lot of my classmates back in the early 2000s, they would write these scripts, and they would be like these scripts would come out, and they'd be like, either if they were shorts or features, they'd be for, if it was a short, they'd be for, it'd have to be made for $100,000. And if it was a feature, it would be, some big sci-fi epic movie. And, obviously, that's great for the process of writing and getting something done. But in terms of, what it is that you can accomplish with the first project, being, just aware of budget, and And also in terms of raising financing, what type of genres lend themselves or stories lend themselves to you personally to being able to, put financing together from the people that you know. And then of course, marketability. Is this thing that you're creating, is it going to have an audience? And so that's, just being aware of that stuff is really important, and making sure that you're creating something that, that's feasible for you to make as a first project. And what I'll say is that the first projects that I did were all under $1 million, and they were much easier to accomplish because those stories generally were regional and personal to the filmmakers. And then also for some of you that may want to develop your own, may not want to specifically focus right now on one specific project, but may want to start a company or a partnership with somebody. Those are other things to think about in terms of the entertainment media landscape, in terms of, putting trailers together, or, corporate videos, things like that. Who are the right people that you can partner with out of, that in your daily life or out of film school. Those are also things that you can do to kind of get your footing in if you need to kind of, more so work on short form content. And then also, outside of just independent films, talking about short form content, there's a lot of opportunity now in terms of being able to get that stuff up on the internet and get awareness for yourself. So it doesn't just need to be feature length independent films. It can be docs, it can be episodic, it can be, animation, or just, short vignettes that tell really cool and compelling stories. So those are all things that I would just suggest in terms of thinking about things that are feasible. Let's go on to the details of it. So, we kind of just went through why is it important? Obviously, putting together your first project really helps, brand you. And it's something that, can really help launch your career. And putting something out into the world is, it's important that it reflects you the right way, because if you're putting it out there, it's going to leave. It will leave. It's reflective of you, and that will be left in people's minds in terms of people that are considering it and watching it. Obviously, if it's something that's your first project, you've got to have an immense amount of passion and drive for it. And it's really got to be something that you just can't get out of your mind. Something that it's got to come out of you, because if not, it's gonna drive you crazy. And so every first time feature filmmaker that I've produced for, their first feature has just been something that they obsess about. They've got to get it out of their system. There's an immense amount of passion for it. For me, in terms of supporting first-time feature directors, and also what I encourage filmmakers to look at, is their project have an urgency to it? Is there a reason that this particular story should be told, now? Is there a relevancy to it? And also, what I love about these types of first projects that filmmakers do is that there's some personal connection to the material in which they're telling the story about. Because I find that those scripts and those stories tend to be the best for a first-time feature director to tell, because they're just intimately knowledgeable about the story that they're telling. Audience, I think you want to be aware, especially in 2019, and how competitive it is to get projects seen and distributed and bought. That making sure that there is an audience for your film. Even if it's a smaller size audience, that's okay, but that there is a group of people that you truly believe will consume what it is that you're making. A film, as you know, can, and this is why it's important to be careful about what it is that you pick. It can really help launch your career, and also brand. Like I said, it brands you. I've known filmmakers that, they make a comedy, and the comedy does as their first film, and then they get signed by agents or managers, and those agents and managers, they just want that filmmaker for the next few years, in the next few films, to stick to comedy. So really, your first project can definitely, pigeonhole you in a way, at least for, the beginning aspect of your career. So you want to make sure that it's something that you feel like you can execute well over and over again, because in our industry, one of the things that happens a lot of time is that people get pigeonholed early in their career. If they make something that's really good, people will see that and they want them to kind of replicate that again, but with a different story. And standing out, again, you want to stand out when you're making your first time feature project. You want to, whether it's a script that you're writing, or it's a finished film that you're trying to sell, it's got to be personal to you. It's got to show how you see the world in a different way than others, and that really helps in terms of making yourself stick out from others, something that's really unique to who you are as an individual. And you're, like I've said multiple times throughout, you're branding yourself, and your brand matters, and you want to make sure that your first project stays authentic to who it is that you are. And sometimes these questions that I've just talked about, in terms of thinking about them, it can take some time to figure out what it is that you want to do and what the right thing is to do for that first project. But it's okay to take your time and think about it, and make sure that you make the right decision. So I would say those are definitely some of the essential considerations that I think in picking. Now I'm going to kind of turn it back to you guys, and I'm just curious, who in this group is making their first project. I know some people have already answered this, that some of you are, but what is that first project? And you guys feel free to talk about this in the chat box. Anybody? Okay. So, yeah, making a first short as a proof of concept, that's a great idea. If you are going to go out and put together a short film that you think can be used as a proof of concept to set up your first feature, totally go for that. It can be really, really helpful, and I really support people in doing that, because it gives backers, financiers, other producers a good idea of what it is that you have the ability to do in the short form, that can then lend itself, obviously, to doing a feature film. Working on shorts. Yep. That's what I would say. You'll hear from Sheldon Candace later, who directed his first feature. He kept making shorts all the way up until he could get that feature made. Let's see here. Stuck with Sophomore Curse, having made a first feature film called Indian Cowboy, a romantic comedy. So trying to get that second film off the ground, that can always obviously be challenging, but just keep pushing at it. I've seen a lot of the filmmakers that I've worked with on their first films. It takes some time to get their second, but a lot of them have been very lucky in being able to get them going. Optioning a short story to adapt to a short film. Great idea. Jeff is wrapping up post on his first feature that he wrote and directed and produced. It's based on our hit web series. Phenomenal. So adapting a short from a web series is great. Having that initial piece of IP to adapt off of. Cameo. I've got two projects. One is time travel feature, and another is a story about artificial intelligence. My first short was sci-fi as well. That's great. Knowing that you really like the sci-fi world, keep sticking with it. When you learn sci-fi intimately well and what works and doesn't work about it, and you keep practicing it, they just get better and better. Having done a couple sci-fi films myself. Independent feature film set in my hometown. Perfect. Making films in your hometown is your first film or second film is always the best, because you can pull in all those resources from your local community to help get those projects off the ground. All right, let's see here. My first feature indie chamber piece is about a suicidally depressed woman who talks to her dead son on an answering machine. I have some funding and equipment. I write features specifically for women over 40. Knowing that you've got that target audience for the films that you're doing, and that you've got a specific focus is great. Was a producer on a feature film about motherhood, but then did a short horror comedy to show I have range and not to pigeonhole self. Fantastic. That I have seen many filmmakers do, so they don't pigeonhole themselves, and it works. Phyllis, developing a film to shoot in New York City and Cape Town, South Africa, looking for a producer of color. Sakita, second is a director, first writing project. It's 100, about a man diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and challenged to lose 100 pounds to save his life. Very cool. Got another one that's a contained thriller, coming of age summer noir comedy, a proof of short concept about first generation immigrant middle schooler, feature about a family story that also deals with immigration and identity. Excellent. These are all awesome, and I encourage you guys to keep it up and get these first projects off the ground. And definitely doing proof of concepts is very, very helpful for both, like I said, producers and reps to see, along with the script, that what it is that your world looks like, and that you have the ability to direct and put something together that's compelling. It will help you in the process of raising financing greatly to have with those filmmakers. So that's great. Those are great questions. So I wanted to, let's see here, we got 10, 20, 40, 50. So I've got one special guest right now, halfway through, that I want to, or a little bit before halfway through, that I want to introduce you guys to. I'll kind of give a little bit of background on Glenn. So Glenn's going to walk into the room here in a minute. But Glenn Gaynor is the president of physical production at Sony Screen Gems, which is a division of Sony Pictures, and also is the president of Innovation Studios, which is, I'll let him talk about, but is a collaboration between Dell, Intel, Deloitte, and Sony Corporation, which obviously makes a lot of the best technology in the world, as well as Sony Pictures, in terms of and what it's meant to do is to implement technology into films. I met Glenn a year ago in terms of putting this film together out here in Austria, Plain. And what I loved about meeting Glenn was that, he is at a studio, and he's been a studio executive for a very long time, and prior to that, a producer. But Glenn has always been very entrepreneurial in his approach to both producing and being a studio executive. And it's rare to find studio people that are as entrepreneurial as Glenn is. So I just wanted to kind of introduce you guys to Glenn, because he's been in the industry for a long time and has been very successful, and have him talk a little bit about what are some examples of things that he's done entrepreneurially, both as a producer executive and just other aspects of his life. So Glenn, why don't you come in, pull up a chair here. And
Great. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Good to see. So Glenn, obviously you've been doing this for a long time. What have you found to be the most what is an example of something that you've done entrepreneurially in your approach, either as a producer or studio executive?
I think it's a good question. I would go back to the beginning of my career as a producer. When I started making movies, and yes, I'm one of those rare people who really, up to this point in my career, besides running 2 studios, physical production on one and being head of Innovation Studios, I have been a motion picture guy. I have just made movies. I didn't make television shows. I didn't really make shorts. It was just feature films. And when I was making the films, I always went against the grain.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody said in those days, all independent films are made in Vancouver, I went to Los Angeles. I always felt that there's such an enormity of like-minded thinking in our industry, and there always has been. But sometimes you're better off making your own destiny and saying, let's go where it's proven, but where so many people aren't, and create a family. And we created a family for many years, for probably 15 years. I was making movies in Los Angeles, and sometimes I was the only feature film in Los Angeles. And you could imagine at that time, I got the best special effects team, and I got the best stunt coordinating team and so forth, because no one else was there. Now, the industry keeps changing, and that isn't the case anymore, but I think it just kind of shares the example that you go where you feel you can have the greatest impact as a producer, and where you can therefore help your filmmakers tell the best story.
Yeah, definitely. And how did that then lead you, like talking about creating opportunities for filmmakers? You've led the initiative to start a new venture with all these different companies and Sony Corporation, Sony Technology, Sony Pictures, called Innovation Studios.
Yeah.
That was kind of, that was your brainchild, and is, by the way, something that you're doing in addition to what your other main job is, which is running physical production on all of Sony Screen Gems movies. What led you to want to do that? Obviously, that was an entrepreneurial pursuit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Of all the studios I landed at Sony Pictures. I could have been at Paramount. I could have been at Universal, and I live in Hollywood. It would have been a heck of a lot easier. But many years ago, to really deconstruct it, because fate has a lot to do with things, and our passion has a lot to do with things. But sometimes a little bit of both. And I was introduced to the then president of Columbia TriStar Motion Picture Group, and I started making movies for Columbia Pictures. And then Screen Gems. And then, of course, I was told that I wasn't allowed to leave Sony Pictures. They said, you're running physical production. And I said, no, I can't do that. I produce. And they said, well, then you can produce too, but you're not leaving. And the guy who ran the company at the time said, I already spoke to the chairman and the CEO and the head of production. They all agreed. And I said, okay, well, I'm screwed now. I guess I'm staying. So I stayed on to oversee making the movies. Then I realized some years into it that Sony started to make cameras. I'm not talking about consumer cameras at the time, but at some point they got into making a real camera. It was called the F65, and it was one of the world's first 8K cameras. And I just was blown away by what it could do. And I would go into the screening rooms and talk to people and say, this is incredible. I don't need all these HMI lights. And I coined a phrase called subtractive lighting, where I said, I think with this kind of technology, we're going to start to see a change in how we make films. And I hired a cinematographer, Michael Barrett, to work with me on a film, to be the DP. And I said, let's lean into this new piece of technology, this F65, this I think it was a 2500 native ISO, which was okay at the time, but 16-bit digital camera. And let's think about how we make films. Rather than pouring light into a scene, let's shoot at night. And I think the movie was called About Last Night, and we shot at 6 in Main in downtown LA. And let's take light away and embrace street lights and sodium vapor and tungsten and HMI and LED. And we did it. And it's funny, he said, I shot a movie called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang right on this very same street with a different camera. and I had a truckload of lights. I said, now my biggest problem is the street lights are too bright. And it was a whole new way of thinking. And that was sort of the genesis of me realizing that I ran a movie division, and I was really the only guy in town who could say, well, hold on a second, I have a camera department, and they're called Sony. And I started to get to know some of the engineers at Sony. And because I made that film, I was then invited to NAB to talk about this camera. And one person introduced me to another person, and I met a guy who was running the consumer division at Sony Electronics, and he had a camera called the A7S Mark I, or up to Mark II, and I got my hands on that camera, and I was just kind of blown away by the fact that this little camera had a 35mm full-frame CMOS sensor in it, which was the same kind of sensor but better than an old camera called the Panavision Genesis. And I was kind of blown away with how technology was changing, that this little sensor used to be in like a $50,000, $60,000 camera, is now in a $2,500 camera. And I started experimenting with that camera and putting it on the big screen, and people would look at it and say, what motion picture camera did you use? And I said, well, I didn't, I used a consumer camera. And so I started leaning into that and started to get to know the people who invented that camera. And I flew to Tokyo and met them and thought, let's make a movie on this camera. Let's try to inspire people to tell stories in different ways, because not everybody can get millions of dollars of grip, electric, top cameras, top lenses, and so forth and so on. I wanted to inspire filmmakers around the world to say, get a good sensor and tell that story. That led me to know the people in Tokyo. And at one point I realized, if you take this technology and the power of story and you put it together, you got something that would be magnificent. What if you inspired humble engineers to help you and me tell stories, and we inspire them to make better technology? Mm-hmm. That's really the power of what this company could be. And I pitched it to somebody in Tokyo. He said, yeah, I think I agree. And a year after that conversation, I was sitting down with the German CEO, Kaz Hirai of Sony, and we crafted the story about, doing something fantastic, and eventually it became Innovation Studios.
That's awesome. That's a real entrepreneurial approach to taking a passion for storytelling and then technology and marrying it together to help create tools for filmmakers to tell stories in different types of ways. Yeah,
and the genesis was just that. I'm always challenged. I'm never given enough money to make a movie. Surprise, surprise, right? And it's something we're all faced with as story makers. Is you want to make the biggest movie you can with whatever you have, and more they don't give us enough money. And so I just started leaning into technology as if it's a paintbrush. It's like, well, what can we do to further the passion of storytelling, and what can we do to unchain ourselves from limitations? When I executive produced Friends with Benefits with Justin Timberlake and Mila Kunis, and had a great director, a good friend of mine, Will Gluck, and we're walking down Manhattan, and I said, it's so funny, I read this script, and it's essentially two people who walk and talk a lot. And this walk and talk movie is costing as much money as that movie I just made called Priest, which was all special effects and CGI and locomotives. And I realized, why it's so damn expensive? Because you've got them walking and talking in Manhattan, and just to have them walk and talk at night, we got to close down the street in front of Radio City Music Hall. We got to lay it down with cables. So I got all those riggers coming in, all the Teamsters coming in. Then we got to put security, because you don't want people to steal all that copper. Wait a full day, then show up, then light it again. Shoot. Shut down many city blocks because you're impeding on businesses, because you need a light here, 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 here. Finish, keep security on for another day, and have another crew come in and get rid of all that expensive copper. How about if we lean into technology so we don't need to do that? And you can actually get back into what filmmaking used to be in the 1970s, when Dustin Hoffman was walking down the street in New York and said, hey, I'm walking here. And I was saying back then, that wouldn't happen, because the DIT would be in the way, and the cables would be in the way.
Yeah.
And you would lose that sense of organic nature being on the street. And I was really trying to say technology can actually get us back to what we did in the 1970s and just make movies.
Yep.
And so, yes, that was all empowered by trying to find ways to tell better stories with the limited resources you sometimes have.
Got it.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, so guys, before we, we're going to take a break, but before we do that, we're going to leave about 5 minutes for you guys to ask myself or Glenn any questions. So we'll do these questions for a few minutes, and then we'll take a quick break. So anybody feel free to ask, and I guess Liz, you'll.
Yeah, I'm going to pop in. So we've got a couple already in the Q&A tab, and folks feel free to use that Q&A area to throw your questions in anytime, and then we'll grab them when we take a break like now. And Glenn, I didn't get a chance to thank you for being here, so thank you for being here. We've got 2 already in the queue. So Scott Tran, do you want to, we can turn on your audio if you want to ask your questions about proof of concept. Just remember, folks, when we ask you about your audio, you'll get a little pop-up. It says, like, host is asking you to unmute your audio, and you just have to click unmute my audio. So, Scott, are you with us? Hello.
Can we see Scott too if he puts his video on?
We're going to just do audio. So, Scott,
Okay.
please join us. I saw you for a second there. Where'd you
Hello?
go? Hi.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Scott.
Hi. Hey, thanks for coming on and talking about this entrepreneurial producing. It's amazing.
Of course.
I want to have a question about the short proof of concept. Should we submit that to festivals too, or is that only good for, say, producers and investors?
Yeah, no, a proof of concept, as long as it has, a beginning, middle, and end, and can make a compelling short film as well, then yes, it's definitely something you would want to submit to film festivals. Sometimes proof of concepts don't have that. They're just maybe like a scene, or just meant to kind of show the artistic style of what it is you're trying to do in your feature. In that case, it probably doesn't make as much sense for film festivals. But if it's something that tells a full story in the short form, but that is also kind of a piece of what your feature would be, then yeah, that would make sense to submit to film festivals.
Cool. Thank you.
Of course.
Thanks, Scott. We've got a couple questions from Nikhil. So Nikhil, I'll let you pick which of your questions you'd like to share with us. Nikhil is the person who was doing his second feature now and was saying he was having the sophomore
Hey, Liz.
slump. Hi, welcome.
Thank you. This question is more relevant to the folks up right now. So, democratization has sort of happened on the post side and the distribution side. I can now get a Resolve version for free and do color correcting, editing for no money. Distribution, debatably, marketing is still very expensive, but debatably, at least distribution is something you can get your content out there. But the production side is what still remains really expensive. I've got a couple of cameras. I have a production company. I've got, some amount of grip and electric equipment, all of that stuff. So I can sort of be independent and get out there and shoot. But things like location, dealing with actor unions and all of those things still end up needing a minimal set of crew and transportation. All of that still becomes, adds up in terms of cash outflow. So are there any business or partnership or collaboration models you folks can sort of suggest that might help us, to the earlier point made about, finding something that benefits a larger group of people? Any models like that would also help on sort of reducing the production costs or at least sharing it upfront, get projects done?
You have any thoughts on that?
As far as, making movies can be expensive. I mean, I think there's a lot of factors now. I think the question was sort of based on how do you share the financial risk with somebody else?
Right.
Rather than asking, how can I make it more affordable?
Yeah.
Right. And that just speaks to private equity.
Right. I kind of got a little lost with your question. Is it because you're saying you have all of your own equipment? Is that what you were?
I do. I mean, I have some equipment, but what I realized was even though I have the equipment to actually power it, you still need crew. Uh,
Yeah.
and, and as you sort of add up all of those elements, you still end up having to have a cash outflow that's
Oh,
unsustainable.
completely. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that would, I mean, that's obviously raising financing for, a short, if that's what it is that you're trying to do. And, it's again, when I've put money together for shorts, I've either done, Kickstarter campaigns or went to individuals to raise financing. And generally, and I'll talk more about this and, working with creative investors and how to find the right creative investors for your projects. But generally, if there was some, on the short form content, I was always successful in putting short financing for shorts together from people that believed in, an initiative of mentorship. Like we were having, younger people work with more experienced people, being able to raise money from folks who believed in that type of collaboration. Or if your short is about something that is, that you think speaks to a specific type of audience or organization, going after people that are involved in those initiatives that your short may be, that your short might have to do something with, or, conveys a message of something that speaks to a certain group that may be able to help you. It's generally finding people that will help you in supporting the financing of a project that have some type of connection, personal connection to the material in which you are telling your story about, or the messaging of what you're telling your story about. And I'll be able to talk more about that in the whole working with creative investors aspect of it. Does that somewhat help?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was also thinking, been thinking about the idea of creating something akin to a theater troupe, but a combination of both talent in front of the camera and behind the camera, and sort of seeing if that collective like approach is something anyone is doing, or if it's workable or feasible even.
With a talent troupe?
With both actors as well as crew, but like forming a collective of
Oh,
people.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you form collectives of people to help put something together, you're obviously bringing in a lot of other individuals that will have their own resources or own relationships to be able to help you pull potentially financing together to make something happen. So I think if a collective is part of that, each person that's in that collective may know somebody who could be supportive of what it is that you're trying to do and help to, put some type of financing together for that project. So yeah, definitely opening the doors to more people to help you in putting something together, I find is always really helpful.
Well, thank you, folks.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, Nikhil. So we've got a bunch more questions coming in, but I think that a lot of them are related to things that you're going to be covering. So why don't we take our 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and get into it, Jason. And if some of these questions are still applicable, we'll ask at the end of the next.
I was just going to ask, before Glenn goes, does anybody have any specific question for Glenn before he leaves? Anybody raising their hand?
I don't know if any in here are specific. Oh, here we go. A question for Glenn from Chris. I think it's Chris. Does Innovation Studios partner with schools? He's a high school film teacher and wanted to see what opportunities there are.
Yeah, it's a good question. At the moment, Innovation Studios, which is located at the heart of Sony Pictures, has a combination of research and development. So we do have a lot of top secret stuff in there, of course. We haven't done the outreach. We just opened on the 4th of June of 2018. We do have a second of the stage of the experience, and we're talking to the marketplace onto that side. So the answer will be yes, and you would be able to contact Sony Pictures for that. But a lot of what Innovation Studios is going to be doing is going to be in the work of the volumetric image acquisition, where we will be able to preserve monuments and sets using quintillions and quadrillions of real life points, kind of like the atoms that we're made out of, so that we can film in a digital world that was once an analog world using traditional motion picture cameras and lenses. So a lot of it, again, is to serve the story, to serve the industry, and to inspire stories that couldn't have been told before. As an example, there was a book I read that was sort of an independent feel, but it took place from Libya to Mississippi to Boston to London, and it was like, there's no way a one-quadrant movie could be made for a four-quadrant budget. But using this technology of collapsing the world, collapsing the geography, and capturing these locations and bringing them onto one stage would allow that story to be told. So it's really about the forward-thinking technology that we're developing and putting out into the world soon. That's going to be the big difference.
Does Phyllis McBride have a question for Glenn? Somebody was raising their hand. Oh.
Oh, I'm not sure I'm seeing what you're seeing, but we can look at all the questions. I'm not seeing specific questions for Glenn.
Jeff had one. Can you ask the team at Sony to add waveform in the A7S?
That's a good, I like that one. I will definitely relay that. Yeah. Yeah, the A7S is a good workhorse, and you can capture a lot with that camera. And you know, we made a movie called The Possession of Hannah Grace with the A7S Mark II for A camera and B camera, and we use Hawk anamorphic lenses, 1.3 anamorphic lenses. So the lenses themselves cost about probably $150,000, $200,000, but the camera cost $2,000. And we put them together, and it changed the way people make films in many ways, because rather than changing a lens, we just picked up the camera and the lens. We had 5 of those. And we shot in 25 days, and we make a heck of a picture. And just said, A camera's ready, B camera's ready, C camera's ready. We didn't change.
Cool.
And so again, it's inspiring just new ways of thinking.
Awesome. All right, so I think we're going to take a 5-minute break. And Glenn, thank you for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure.
For joining us. And so we'll be back in a few minutes. I'm going to run to the restroom, and then we'll come right back.
Nice meeting you all.
Thanks, Glenn. So Jason, you can just stop your video and audio for now, and when you come back, we'll start class again.
Okay.
Hello. Jason
Hello.
will wait another 50 seconds to be our full 5 minutes. But this is going great. Everyone's really enjoying it so far.
Awesome.
So just a couple seconds. All right. You want to jump back in?
Yeah. All right. Hey, guys. Welcome back to Salzburg. Always wanted to say that. All right. So we're going to, if we can open back up our my PowerPoint, Jason, that would be great. Okay. Excellent. So, Liz, can we add a couple more? Excellent. Okay. Perfect. So, next step, and then we'll follow this with some questions. So, working with collaborators and creative investors. And a lot of this I will focus on, investors, and I'll give some specific examples. But the main thing is that, you know, when you're finding the people that you're going to work with, in our industry, the thing that I've found the most useful is it's about communication, and reliability, and accountability. You know, when you're working in entertainment, there's and making films, there's obviously a lot of different you know, moving pieces, parts, people. You know, artists, as we all know, are very passionate individuals, and as we are, and so having very good, transparent communication with people, on both the partner side as well as on the creative investor side is crucial. Sharing information and being prompt with it, and transparent with it, and at the same time, you know, just being accountable to what it is that you say that you're going to do and to accomplish, and obviously that goes along with being reliable as well. And as we know, working in this medium, you know, a lot of times you have two different opposing, you know, forces. You've got the creative side, and you have the business side, art and commerce. And the best thing that I think an entrepreneur, producer, or content creator can do is learn how to bridge both of those sides in a very, you know, cohesive way. And that's spending a lot of time listening to what it is that people desire, what it is that they want and need, and making sure that you're keeping communication between both sides open. Producers, a lot of times, are, you know, we're facilitators, and we facilitate between both the business side, which could represent an independent financier or studio or network for that matter, as well as the creatives, and helping to listen to both sides and problem solve. And we are master problem solvers, and we're also the conduit for communication. And so that is very important to do, a lot of listening, and then being able to convey in a way that one side can understand what the other side is trying to get across. And then let's see here, the financing and business side. So when you're putting together these projects, one of the things that's in my opinion very important is understanding how you're going to put together a secure and financial, legal and financial backbone of the project that you're creating, and really understanding how to operate, you know, well from a business point of view. And so, you know, whether that's, you know, accounting practices, you know, creating proper legal documents and contracts, which we'll spend a lot of time on. It's important to have, in the same way that it's important to have, you know, efficient and great creative, it's also important to make sure that you've got a strong component of both the financial and legal side of a project. Because when you do that, as an artist, you're showing potential creative investors, you know, that they can trust you with putting financing into a company that you're starting or into a specific type of project. And that makes it a lot more efficient to work with investors and people that, you know, really look at our industry more from a business point of view than a creative. And one of the things that we've spent a lot of time on, you know, through our Catalyst initiative at Sundance is keeping, you know, very fluent communication between creative investors and filmmakers. It's been kind of one of the staples of that program outside of getting projects financed. And, you know, we've broken this down into 4 different stages in terms of when you're working with creative investors as producers and filmmakers. And so one of what we call stage 1 is kind of the discovery process. And part of that is really figuring out when both sides are talking to each other, what success looks like. So from your point of view, if you're going to raise the financing for something, what does success at the end of that project look like for you, and what does success at the end of that project look like for your investor? And that's something that's really important to talk through, to make sure that, you know, both sides have a clear understanding of what they're looking for. Being clear about, you know, what is what's the creative process of how something's going to be made, making sure that both sides are clear and transparent about that. How are decisions made throughout the project? How important is the financial gain for an investor on a project? A lot of times, you know, on independent films, you will find investors that, you know, obviously want to make their money back, but the best investors on independent films are doing it for other reasons. Reasons that have to do with some type of connection to the material in which you're making a film about. That's the reason a lot of people invest in documentaries or donate to documentaries, not because they're expecting to see a return, but because it's supporting some type of social cause that is an agenda of theirs. When you're putting these projects together and you're working with collaborators, as I've talked about, communication and information sharing is so key throughout the process. Personal meaning, you know, what, and I just referred to this, but what is the personal reason that somebody is getting involved? A lot of times for them in investing, a lot of times for the movies that I've done, especially in independent films, I've always tried to find investors where the material has some type of connection to the material, that I believe that the filmmaker is going to execute a really great project, but for some reason, if that film does not recoup its investment back, that the investor still had a great experience because it had the final product had some type of meaning to them because they had some type of personal connection to the story in which it was that we were telling. And, you know, being clear about what it is that you're looking at from your investors for day-to-day participation and decision-making in films. That's something that's always best to be talked about up front. Are you going to allow them to visit set? Are you going to allow them to give notes on cuts? Those are important things to talk through. Also, a lot of times these investors that you're talking to may have other ways of being able to, you know, give to your projects outside of just cash. They may have relationships within the place that you're filming. To help with housing. They may have frequent flyer miles. They may have their own experience within the subject matter, and then can introduce you to other people that you could talk to about that may be helpful in terms of, you know, adding perspective to the story that you're telling. So I always have loved to look at the creative investors that I'm working with in a way of not just seeing them as dollars, but as real contributors to the project, outside of just their capital contribution, but contributions in a way where they can help us with other relationships that they have. And then, of course, you know, it's always very clear that at the beginning in the discovery process, it's important to talk about credits and you know, what types of credits that you're offering to people. That's always key to get out, excuse me, right up front in the process. And then we talked about, you know, making sure that both sides understand what success is. So that is what we kind of break down as the, you know, the first aspect of getting into a relationship with, you know, creative investors. And I think it's always important to try to find people that have some type of personal connection to your story or to the place in which you're making your film. Because those people, if they're generally high net worth individuals, I have always found that they're more willing to get involved if they're about supporting artists and they've got a connection to the material or to the place that you're making your film. And then I wrote here at the very bottom, proposal. And this is something that, you know, is always on the filmmaker to do. And after you know that somebody is interested, after you've gone through that discovery process, after you've made sure that you're both on the same page, and that you know, you both have the same feeling of what success looks like at the end of the project, it's up to the filmmaker to, you know, go through that proposal stage. And part of that proposal stage is you know, outlining your budget, your timeline, what type of, you know, what types of credits you're offering, what types of rights you're going to be giving investors, what type of participation you're going to be offering, and, you know, what your premium is. And I'll talk, you know, what you're thinking that their investment is, what they're getting in return for that investment based on the, you know, the financial aspect of the setup of the movie. Which is usually called a return on investment, an ROI plus a premium, which is on top of what their initial investment is and what their back end percentage would be. So it's really up to the filmmaker to kind of to put that proposal forward as the producer in putting a project together, and what the timeline is going to be. So that's the proposal stage. And then obviously when you submit your proposal, you submit it directly to your investor. And then once you're on the same page, you would then get into the commitment and contract negotiation aspect, which has a lot to do obviously with contracts. At that point, you generally have a lawyer involved, and you know, both sides work together side by side in terms of getting a contract done. And what I would say to you guys is that when you're putting together your own projects and you get lawyers involved in projects, you'll have your lawyer, your investor, or the other side will have their lawyer. You want to make sure that that you are keeping as much open communication as possible with your actual investor throughout the process, because a lot of times things get misconstrued between lawyers. And you want to make sure that while your lawyer is communicating directly with your investor, and while your lawyer is communicating directly with you, that you're also being able to keep an open flow of communication with the investor about any issues that arise, and also just making sure that you're pushing to keep on the timeline that you've set forward in the earlier stage of this process. And then obviously the last stage of this is the finalization and closing. And usually that has to do with closing investor agreements and operating agreements, which I'll take you guys through. So again, you know, it's a big closing financing for any project, whether it's a short or a feature or anything else for that matter. It's very much about communication and both sides having a very clear understanding of what it is that they're looking for from the onset. And what the epitome of success is for both sides throughout that process. And obviously the same thing goes with your creative collaborators, making sure that you keep communication and an open flow the whole way through, whether it's with your writer, your DP, your editor, producers, etc. So with that, does anybody have any questions for me about working with collaborators and creative investors?
Well, we have some good ones. I'm going to first just combine a couple of folks' questions just as a resource check from you. Isaac said he loved the case study for love, and he wanted to know where we could find other case studies. And then Noam asked if you knew where there might be examples of proposals somewhere where like people could see layouts to sort of emulate. Do you have thoughts on those?
Yeah, definitely. Well, in terms of, the case studies, each year Film Independent issues a few case studies in a publication that they do, I believe, each fall. So definitely, look out for those case studies. I know Film Independent does them on a few films each year. I also think Sundance does some case studies as well. So I think Liz could probably, offer more information about that. But yeah, the nonprofits that are supportive of films generally, do a few case studies each year.
Cool. So let's see.
And then in terms of proposal, I don't have, let me look to see if I have a proposal that I could share. I think I might have one for one of our films a while ago. It's been a few years since I've put independent financing together, since we've made so many of our last movies for Netflix. But yeah, I do think I have some, and if I do, we'll share it for sure. And then was there one other question?
Yeah, and I'll also mention we're sending out to all of you who participate in the class a resource list after class, and that is going to include a couple links to the case studies as well. So Alan had a question about, in terms of the collaboration topic you've been talking about. Alan, do you want to come on and ask about writers? We will send you an audio link, an audio request now. Maybe. I'm not sure it's working, so I'm going to just ask for him. Sorry, Alan. How do you decide as a producer? Well, he asked whether a writer is going to be the right director for a project, but I'd love to hear about writers in general. How do you work with writers?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, in terms of writers, there's two ways. Either we'll talk about an idea from the very beginning, and as a producer, we'll hatch it together. And then that writer will go off and do a treatment and come back, and then we'll go over it. And then, they'll start writing their script, and then we'll go back and forth over drafts. The movie that I'm doing right now called Plane, which, we're shooting out here in Austria, that's how that developed. It was that writer I went to school with. We talked about wanting to make a contained thriller, something that we knew that we could make for a lower budget. He developed a treatment, and I looked at the treatment. I gave him my thoughts. He came back. I gave him more thoughts. And then he went off to go write the script. And then we went back and forth over drafts of the script for a year. So that's one way, is developing together. And then another way is I get a lot of scripts sent to me from writers directly, from nonprofit, from filmmaker support organizations, and then from agencies. And through people I know through film school, and that's me reading those scripts and then deciding whether or not there's something that I want. It's a project that I want to pursue, and if it is, it's having that initial meeting with the filmmaker. A lot of times, I am looking for projects that the writer is also the director, so it's also a matter of being very passionate about that director as well. And their work and their energy, and just feeling like it's going to be a good relationship because you're going to end up working together for such a long time. If we like the script, they're open to our feedback, and they feel like they could be a good partner, then we'd hopefully work together. So for me, it's obviously I've got to be engaged by the script, but I also have to really like the person in which I'm collaborating with, because it's a long journey. It's a long journey.
Cool. Can you do one more?
One more question?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So Sakita, who's here with us backstage, so I'm going to ask the question for her, said she's always been confused about the financials of the producer, investor, writer, director relationship. And I think you're going to get into this some, Jason. She says, in the proposal, is the investor premium based on a percentage of the film profits? Do the writer's director retain any long-term incentive once the producer takes on the project? How do those relationships work in the contract?
Yeah, so basically, even before you get to that stage of proposal, you've already got your, with an investor, you've already got your deal figured out with the writer and director. So the producer, the writer, and the director all have a very clear understanding of what it is that they're making in the film, what their back-end percentages would be. Usually the producer, acquires those rights to the screenplay, at that point. So all those deals are done. And it's very clear what it is that everybody gets and what their back end is and what their upfront fee is. By the time that you then go out to your investor, that's all figured out. And then when the investor gets involved, general independent film financing for low budget films is set up as this. An investor would invest $1, let's say, into your movie. They get that $1 back when you sell the film, as long as you sell the film and get that $1 back. And then usually investors get anywhere from a 15 to 25% premium on their investment, which means that after the all the dollars that make up the budget are recouped, if one investor's put in $1, they'd get back an additional 15 to 25 cents, depending on what premium you're giving them, whether it's 15, 20, or 25%. And then after all of the investors get their premium back from the sale of the film or the future participation in how a film is performing, then there is generally a 50-50 split on the back end of net proceeds. And I'll show you guys this in a waterfall. But that means a lot of times the investors take 50% after they recoup their premium, and then the filmmakers get 50%. And that 50% is divided out amongst the writer, director, actor, some crew members, etc. So that's usually the way that it works on the independent films. And that's what would be figured out in the proposal stage. But before the proposal stage, you're already going to have your deals figured out with your collaborators outside of your creative investors.
Thanks, Jason, and thanks, Sakita, for segueing us so beautifully into the next section.
Which is understanding the legal and business components of content creation. Okay, so we'll get to go. We're gonna have to zip through. I think, let's see here. Yeah, we'll have about 15, 20, probably about 20 minutes for this. So we are going to go to the back to the slide. And I'll just, okay. So I'm gonna take you guys through the following. Creating an LLC. And generally when you're forming a piece of content, you've got to start an entity that owns that content. And that's generally an LLC. And that's the entity that contracts out to all parties that are going to be involved in making the film, but also in investing in the film. So that is the operating agreements. I'll take you through that. And then the other most important thing that you have to have together is chain of title. And chain of title means having the rights to the source material in which your project is going to be based off of. Whether that is a book, an article, a screenplay, a graphic novel. Chain of title is every single piece of property that the screenplay or the script for what it is that you're creating is based off, and making sure that you have those rights, and then also having the actual right of the screenplay. I'll take you through briefly a director agreement, a producer agreement, a talent agreement, a crew agreement, and then the famous waterfall, which we will show you. So let's go out of the PowerPoint presentation and into the operating agreement. If Jason can pull the operating agreement up, that would be great. Okay, so we're gonna zip through these. I'm gonna move down my chat boxes so I can see this full screen. Okay, so Jason, you can start flowing through this. So this is an operating agreement. And again, this is this is for the creation of a company that's going to own a piece of IP. And part of what you can see here, guys, is that these operating agreements literally reference the budget. They reference the approved date of the screenplay. You can keep going, Jason. They, if you can, let's see here. These are just all definitions. it references what the film is. Stop for a second, Jason. Go back up. Stop for a second and scram up a little. Okay. Keep going. Stop right there. The film shall mean a motion picture to be created under this operating agreement entitled Franny, based on the approved screenplay, and be directed by so-and-so, which film is currently scheduled to commence principal photography on October 21st, 2013. It also talks about it also defines what the film tax credits are, because this film benefited from a tax credit. Jason, you can keep going. So you can see a lot of these are definitions on these first few pages of things that will be referenced in this operating agreement. And they're very, very detailed. So it talks about the formation of the company. This was a company we formed in New York. Okay, the business of this company. Stop there for a second. The objects and purposes of this company are solely to engage in the ownership, development, financing, production, distribution, and the exploitation of film in any and all media now known or hereafter devised. I love that. And it talks about how we're going to be pursuing film tax credits, etc. So again, that's what this sole company was formed to create this specific movie of that film Franny, which is now called The Benefactor, which, by the way, was a Sundance Labs project written and directed by a filmmaker by the name of Andrew Renzi. You can keep going through. This talks about, the capital contributions and the capital accounts of the individual investors. Keep going. Funding conditions. So the funding conditions basically has to do with when each investor is going to fund and at what point do they fund. Keep going through. And then all of this just has to do with, okay, again, more capital account information, which is what each investor puts in. This has to do with how income taxes and distributions are recorded, so it's all accounting information. Keep going. Let's go to page 15. Oh, sorry. Actually, go back up a little bit, Jason. Go back up a little bit, Jason. Okay, so this right here is the waterfall for the film. So distributions 5.05 is literally when the money flows into the company, how it all gets distributed. That's referenced in an operating agreement. So, and that's negotiated between the filmmakers and the investors. When I take you through the actual waterfall, we'll go into all this stuff more specifically, but it's going to be easier to do it on the waterfall document. So we can keep scanning through. Tax distribution section, there was more about film tax credits, withholding tax, how the books are kept. So, the management of the managing member. So I was obviously a managing member. And it talks about who the managing members are. Those are the people that get to make the decisions. Keep going through. Right here, there you can see. Go back up again. Go to page there you go, powers of the managing members. So it literally lists out what it is that the managing members can do. And on this film, there were 5 managing members, and to make any key decision, 4 out of 5 of the managing members had to agree. So when we were selling the film, 4 out of 5 had to agree. If we were going to increase the budget, 4 out of 5 had to agree. So these operating agreements get very detailed. You can continue going all the way through the end. So that's kind of it. That's an operating agreement for a company, and then this literally needs to be signed by every single individual that is investing into a film. And these documents can take generally anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks to negotiate. So when you're putting together a project and you're putting your financing together, and after you have all your financing committed, you want to make sure that you're leaving enough time to get this document signed and negotiated by everybody before the start date. Jason, go back up to go back up a little bit, actually. I want to go to the credit section. The credit section is on page 25. The other thing about these operating agreements is they can also list out all what the specific credits are for each person. So if you guys see here, all these credits are listed. You've got, keep going up one more page. Jason, one more page. So right here, you've got the production company credits, which company's in first position, what company's in second. You've got the in association with credits. And then when you go down, you'll see you've got all the producer credits listed. So all of that stuff is also all figured out in this operating agreement. And everybody signs off on it. So these are very detailed agreements, and these are agreements that need to be signed generally before a movie is cash flowed. And when I say by cash flowed, I mean that the money is put into a bank account for you to fund your film. And there's lots of signature pages because none of these people are generally in the same place. So they all sign their own individual documents, they send them in, and then you have to collate them all together. So that's an operating agreement. Let's go through a screenplay agreement. Okay, screenplay purchase agreement. So this agreement governs the rights to the screenplay in which the film company is acquiring. And we can go down to the rights granted section. And if you look under rights granted, you can see that it says, upon payment of the purchase price as defined below, the owner hereby sells, conveys, grants, transfers, sets, etc., all rights in all media now known or ever hereafter devised into the screenplay. And then literally it goes into specifics of what types of rights in the section below, the granted rights. So generally for independent films, when you are selling your rights to a company, they are acquiring all rights. The purchase price is there. Their back-end participation on this movie was 2.5% for the screenplay. Generally on films, for a piece of source material, that can go anywhere from 2.5% to 5%. Keep going. Under number 3, it's written, their credit, this was a writer-director, so they had a written and directed by credit on page 3. You were going in the right direction. You're now going back up. Okay, go down to the bottom of page 3. Keep going. Okay, here's something that's really important for you guys to know. Stop. When you guys are selling, when you as a producer are buying a screenplay, or there are any writers on here, you are representing and warranting to the person that's buying the script that you are the sole and exclusive proprietor of the work in which you're selling, which means that nobody else can claim any right to it. Now, this script was written by one person, but if it had been written by multiple people, there would have had to have been multiple contracts for this script. So this writer who wrote this script, it was her sole script, and she sold it to the company that was making the film. But that's a really important thing that you've got to pay attention to, is that when you're writing something, when you're selling something, make sure that if you're the only person that's doing the contract, that it was solely your piece of material versus anybody else having thinking that they may have any right to claim on your material as well. And I've run into this issue before on a project where there were other people that came out later throughout the process that thought that they also had the rights to a piece of source material. that the writer had granted us the rights to. They didn't, but it still created an issue. You can keep going through. These are all just other types of pieces of information here. The company makes their own representation and warranties. You can keep going through, Jason. Here's another stop. Go back to 11. Not page 5, but 11. Okay, I'm sorry, 10. So when you guys acquire a screenplay, a lot of times these contracts have reversion clauses in them, which means that if for some reason the film has not been made, has not gone into principal photography by a certain period of time, the script may be able to be reverted back to the writer of the script with a lien against it for any money that's actually been spent on the production to date. So let's say you go into pre-production, you're spending money, but then for some reason the movie doesn't happen within a certain period of time. That writer may be able to reacquire the rights to their script through a reversion clause subject to any money that's been spent on the project to date. That's something to keep in mind for writers out there. It's really good to have these clauses in contracts, and producers, it's something to be aware of. Okay, so those are some of the key elements. We go down to page 8. Jason, down to page 8. So down here you can see, like, it has your premiere language. It has, whether you get a DVD, Blu-ray, or soundtrack, the fact that you'd be covered by insurance. So, these are all things that you would find in a writer's agreement. That's a writer's agreement. Okay, let's go to a director's agreement. Okay, director's agreement. And let's go to page 2 of the director's agreement. On page 2, it talks about what the responsibilities are of the director during pre-production, production, keep going down, post-production, and you can see that it requires these directors to be exclusive during those periods. In this film, on both pre-production and production, meaning they can't work on something else while they're making the movie. It talks about the length of the film. It talks about the director, what the director's rights are for additional photography. Keep going down. Talk about, there's the length section. Talks about the technical requirements. That the film must be in English language, live action film, shot on 35 millimeter. Talks about that the director's cut should adhere to the screenplay dated so-and-so. It talks about that film must not be greater than R. Talks about that the director has to get cover shots. Usually cover shots are for TV versions or airplane versions of films that may have some type of nudity in them. There's your compensation section. Directors are generally paid on the film by a 20-60-10-10 formula, meaning 20% over pre-production, 60% over production, 10% upon delivery, and 10% upon the director's cut, and 10% upon delivery. Their contingent compensation is their back end, movie really successful. These contracts also govern cutting rights. Go down to page 5. So cutting rights section right there. This movie had cutting rights where there were 5 people that were involved, and 4 out of 5 had to agree on the final cut of the movie. I will say that one of those people was the director, the rest were the producers and the lead investors. Keep going. You've got your credits section right here, what their credit was. And you can drift through the rest of this, but a lot of these other things just have to do with suspension, the fact that we can assign this agreement to another entity, what their moral rights are, publicity aspects, promotion, and it covers their first opportunity to direct sequels, remakes, etc. That's usually language you'll find in these contracts. And that's about it. So that's your standard director agreement. Okay, let's go to a producer agreement. Producer agreement. So if you go down, it talks about what the producer's services are that they're offering during development, pre-production, principal photography, and post-production. So again, all these agreements for directors and producers list out specifically what it is that we're doing at each point, what the specifications of the picture are, what the compensation plan is, which is also generally paid in 20, 60, 10, 10, just like a director, what our contingent compensation is. This covers exclusivity. Your credits are listed in your producer agreement, where specifically your personal credit is. This is on page 4, as well as where your company, what your company credit is. If you're getting a logo credit, there's the credit section. And then also what it is that your transportation situation is, your accommodations, your rental car, all the perks that you would get if you're going to be on set. That's on page 5. There you go. And the rest of it is all just general language having to do with suspension, termination, using your name and likeness, everything else that we've seen on these other agreements so far. Oh, that right there is a producer's first opportunity to be able to be a producer on a sequel or a prequel or a remake having to do with the film. So, and then that's your reps and warranties section. Yeah, there's the first opportunity section. All right, let's go on to talent agreement. And keep in mind that as a producer, you are negotiating all of these deals when you're putting together a movie. It's a lot of deals to do. So this is a talent agreement. It lists who the director is, who the producers are, what the production company is, who the actor is, what they're getting paid. Keep going, what their compensation is, a lot of times actors will have a deferred compensation as well as a back end, which is the contingent compensation. Keep going. It talks about the schedule. 5 consecutive 5-day weeks in Philadelphia, what their credit is, what approvals they have. Generally, top-level actors will have approvals over other actors in the movie. What their transportation is. Likeness approval has to do with photo kills, so they actually get to go through all the photos that you would use for marketing, and they get to kill 25 to 50% of them generally, meaning that those can't be used. Press on set, the fact that there can't be any forced calls, the fact that no call time could be before 7 a.m. without the talent's prior consent, the fact that there need to be 12 full hours of rest period, the wardrobe that they can take home. They have control over the behind the scenes. They get approval over their bio. You keep going. There won't be any nudity. What their dressing room situation is, the fact they got a personal assistant, they had the right to hire their hair and makeup person, they had the right to have access to dailies, they had security. So this contract was for a movie star, it was for an A-list actor. If you go down to page 6, under dubbing, right there, dubbing. You go back up on page 6 in the middle. There shall be no dubbing of talent in English without talent's prior written consent, meaning that only the actor could speak for themselves in the movie unless we had their consent before. So you can see these agreements are quite detailed. There's a lot of points to negotiate, and this is definitely a part of a producer's job in addition to all the creative that they're doing. With the director, the producer is working with the lawyers on putting these contracts together. Okay, let's go to the director of photography agreement. This is a basic crew agreement. Okay, so you go down. This was for a DP on a film, and you can see the term. The director of the DP is generally going to work for 20 days, or 24 days, sorry, of production, 20 days of pre-production, and 1 week of wrap. That the DP has the rights to be able to be involved in additional photography and any retakes. Keep going. The DP has the right to hire their equipment and crew, that they have to be exclusive to the movie during pre-production, what their compensation is, if they work a 6th day, what that rate is. Keep going. What their contingent compensation is, what their credit is. Paid ads, that's the billing block that you would see in advertisements, the fact that their names would be there. What their per diem is when they're on set, away from home. The fact that any expenses that they have to be pre-authorized. All standard language. So, and then there's suspension and termination language in here as well. And the rest of it is pretty standard. But again, very detailed contract for crew members that are getting main title credit as well, which is usually a production designer, editor, DP, and costume designer. Okay, let's jump into the waterfall. Okay, so this is a waterfall for a movie that I produced. And here we have the income. So at the very top, you can see right here, that is what's called ROI, which is rest of world territory. So that's the territory outside of the Paramount territory, which was the domestic distribution in the United States and Canada. Okay, so this movie had, let's say, about 1.2 $5 million come in. Or I guess, actually, let's just go to the total column. Had 1.684 million come in. Then you can see these are the expenses. So when you, this document that you're looking at right now is called a collection agreement. And a collection company actually is the company that receives all the money from all the different sources around the world for the movie, and they get paid a fee. So that's their fee that they get paid. Keep going down. You'll see that there's residuals. That's the residual number. This movie was a non-union film with the exception of SAG, so there were only SAG residuals. But if the movie was DGA, Directors Guild, Writers Guild, etc., there would have been more of a holdback for residuals. These are sales agent expenses. So when people sell your movie, generally foreign sales agents, they have to travel around the world to different markets, whether it's Cannes, Toronto, etc., and they have to sell your movie, and that costs money for them to do. So they, this film had to pay that sales agent $100,000. And then you have the domestic sales agent. So these were the people that were selling the movie for domestic rights, whereas these were the people, where the mouse is, that were selling the movie for international rights. And on the domestic rights section, this was William Morris and CAA, two agencies, and they each got 5% of the sale, of the domestic sale. This was our law firm. They took $25,000 for doing all the legal work on the distribution agreement. And then you can see these investors recouped, have almost recouped most of their actual investment into the film for what it is that they put in. And then this is not the final cost report, but, or the final report, but on this film, the investors also got their premium as well, which was 20%. And eventually on this film, we will get to net profits, where all of these people that are listed here, which were all crew members, will get anywhere from 10% all the way literally down to 1.214%. And this is the 50% that goes to the investors, I'm sorry, to the creatives, and then down at the very bottom is the 50% that goes to the three investors and the net profits. So that is your general waterfall for a movie. Now here's your studio report for the same movie. This is the money that the studio has gotten so far in receipts. So when you get these reports from a studio, you can see that the studio breaks down their gross receipts by theatrical, VOD, which is home versions, pay TV, other television, other, and this movie so far has brought in $4.4 million in gross receipts for this film. And you can see that the studio has a distribution fee. I forgot what the percentage was, but it's about 1.819 million, 1.189, which means that there's 3.2 million left. And then these are all of their expenses for what they've done on the film, which equaled 732,000, leaving 2.482 million. And then the studio on this deal splits the net profits of that, leaving 1.241 million for the filmmakers, which then needs to be decreased by the advance that the studio paid, which was 1.275 million, which was in that other document that I showed you, because that's now gone to the investors, which was in the other waterfall agreement. And so right now we're still in a deficit of 100,000, but by the next statement, I expect that we'll be out of that deficit. And once we get to zero, Paramount's going to start cutting us checks again. And then more money is going to flow into that other waterfall agreement that we first showed you, that will then start going back to the investors of the film, on top of what it is that they've already recouped. So this is a studio waterfall agreement, whereas the other one was the investor waterfall agreement. So I know I just threw a lot of stuff at you guys, having to do with all these contracts and waterfalls, but let's take 5 minutes of questions about any of the stuff that we just went over.
Okay, we've got a whole bunch, but feel free to throw more into the Q&A, folks. We have several questions actually about documentary films. I know that might be a whole other topic, but can you generally talk about how some of this may or may not apply to the documentary world?
Yeah, definitely. Well, the one thing about documentaries is that they are financed by equity as well as grants. So you may have a documentary that costs $1.5 million, and half of that budget may be non-recoupable grants that you get from foundations. That's money that you don't need to pay back when you sell the film. However, documentaries also have equity, and that equity is money that you would need to repay back after you sell the film. And so in the same way that narrative films recoup their equity, plus they give a premium, plus they give a piece of the net profits, you would do the exact same thing with a documentary. The only exception being that part of that documentary may be financed by money that does not need to be recouped because it's charitable grants. And a lot more documentaries are financed by charitable grants, meaning that there's a reduced amount of equity that's needed. And generally it has to do with the cause, what a documentary stands for, which is really kind of promoting a social cause. My hope is that in the future, certain types of narrative films are also financed by grants as well. Money that doesn't need to be repaid back.
Yeah, that's happening a little bit more, but not so much yet, huh?
Yes.
We're gonna,
A little bit more, but not.
I don't know your real name, Amkarini, but we'll ask you to come on audio because I think your question applies to everyone. Amkarini?
Yes, hi, I'm Anna.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Anna.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, hello. Let's jump in. The original question I asked was, it seems incredibly important to have a good lawyer, clearly. And so I would love some advice on trying to seek that out and find the best lawyer who is a fit for you personally. And in addition to that, it sounds like a lot of this has to be done up front. And how do those lawyer fees, or is there any way to negotiate in the lawyer fees to be paid after the movie is made? That's kind of a big question.
Yeah, well, I mean, so definitely you want to look up, great production attorneys. And a lot of times what you can do is if you go onto IMDb, you can look up some of your favorite independent films and see who the lawyers are that have worked on those films, because they'll be listed in the credits. And I would say for the most part, there's probably 10 lawyers whose names you'll see over and over and again on films that premiere at domestic US festivals, because there's only so many production attorneys in our industry that do lower budget films. And what you want to do is you want to call those people, see if you can go grab coffee with them or go into their office, tell them what it is that you're doing, what your story is. And sometimes the younger attorneys at those firms that are doing production legal can sometimes help you out at the very beginning without charging. But you have to build a relationship with them. I definitely had some attorneys early on in my career that helped me on certain projects at the very beginning based upon elements that I had in place in terms of getting those films to a place where I could then pay them. I would have to pay them while we were making them, before we started production on the movie. I couldn't wait until after. But sometimes I would be able to get maybe a month of work from them based upon elements that I had attached and them really believing in the project. But usually, again, those are like younger attorneys. But I would just start looking up all the films that you love out of the festivals and seeing who those production attorneys are, and then calling them and seeing if they're willing to sit down with you.
That's
It's all
fantastic.
about,
Thank you.
it's all about building the relationship with them.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Thanks for the question. You want to take another one?
Oh, yeah.
How about Leah or Leia? Tell us if you're a Leah or a Leia when you come on. I would also love to hear where folks are from when you come on to ask your questions. Leah, Leia, are you there? Okay, I'm not sure she's here, so I'm just going to ask for her. Can writers maintain rights to their characters?
Yes. That's part of the negotiation in the agreement for the screenplay. Whether or not you are turning over all of the characters that you've written in that screenplay to the entity in which is buying it, or whether you're reserving the rights to those characters so you own the rights to them for future use without having your current investors and producers attached. So that is something that would be negotiated in your agreement, in your writer's agreement.
Okay, Noam has a long one. So Noam, I'm going to ask you to come on to ask about your the producer, director, split, backend, etc. agreement. Can we bring Noam on to audio? Sorry, folks. Looks like we're having some.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you are.
Yay!
Hi, Noam.
Hi. Thank you so much. Yeah. So my question is, like in the producer-director agreement, before you even get to financing, you know, how do you negotiate like back end and producer fee splits when you're like the only producer on the project, but obviously, you know, if you do your job right, maybe a bigger producer comes on or like another production company comes on, other financiers come on. When you do it in this early stage, are you just like doing it between you and the director, knowing that it's going to change? And like, how does that all play out?
Yeah, you would figure that out with the director up front. And then you figure that up with the director up front and you come to your own agreement. And part of that agreement should be if you're bringing somebody else in, what it is that you would, you know, how it is that you would split what it is that you're giving them, if at all. So that's just part of the initial negotiation between you and the writer director at the very beginning, knowing what it is that each of you are getting, and if a third party producer is going to get involved, how it is that you're going to divide out between the two or three of you, what it is that you're giving them. So
okay, so you would just spell it out like initially, like, oh, if we brought like a third person in, then mine would get split in half, stuff like that.
Yeah, like what you'd be giving or what they'd be giving to it, or if the writer director is expecting it all to come from your side, or if you're expecting them to participate in that. Those are all conversations that you want to have early on.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks everyone for all the questions. We, believe it or not, only have half an hour left. I know there was a lot more ground Jason wanted to cover. So yeah. Jason, I will leave it to you to.
All right, so let's go back to, and we're going to do this section really quickly, and then we're going to jump into love because Sheldon Candace is standing by and waiting. And if Sheldon can just make sure that you're almost available, that'd be great. Okay, so if we can go back to my PowerPoint, the marketplace, the last slide on the PowerPoint. Okay, so this is something to think about. You guys are going to be creating content for a really changing environment and world right now. You want to make sure that you're setting the content up that you're creating to have its best possible success in the marketplace. And so in thinking about how you're packaging an independent film for success in the marketplace, at the, to be able to be sold or distributed. The things that you really want to think about, and we talked about this earlier, is making sure that you feel your film has an audience and that you feel like you're putting the best possible team in place with the best possible script to make a film that can really succeed. And also I would say, a mixture of recognizable faces. There was a movie at Sundance this year called, The Last Black Man in San Francisco, and the trailer for that film premiered today. If you get a chance, check it out. The trailer is one of the best trailers I've seen for an independent film in a long time. And, that movie had a couple, new actors in it that are great, but then it also had somebody like Danny Glover, right? So they put, whereas the leads of that film were, for the most part, unrecognizable actors, they put a couple of actors in that movie that you would recognize. I think that is important because those people can be utilized in marketing, even if they're supporting roles. Sheldon and I did the exact same thing in our film Love, which we'll talk about. So you want to make sure when you're putting a film together that you're surrounding the best off screen, as well as making sure that you've got maybe one or two people on screen that an audience will be familiar with. You don't always have to do that, but it can be helpful. You also really want to understand the marketplace for films. So you can sell films or other types of content, at this point episodic and VR content as well, at domestic film festivals as well as international film festivals. These festivals generally serve as markets, places where buyers, either international distributors or domestic distributors, which are the US distributors, come to buy films. They watch films in screenings, and then your goal is for them to buy it. So when you're making a project as well, it's also good to think about who could be the right buyers for this movie based upon other films that they have released in the past. And again, part of that is making sure that that your film has some type of audience. Even if it's a specific target audience that can be niche, that's still important, because what I've been noticing recently in our industry is that if you make a movie that really does well within a niche marketplace, a niche audience within the marketplace, if you get that circle of people to start really talking about your movie and rooting for it, other people that may not be within its target audience will go see it. And that's something that is definitely happening now with independent films, and it's working in terms of targeting on one specific audience. It works for that audience, and then it ripples out in other circles to people that would be interested in going and seeing the movie because they've heard positive word of mouth from one group of people. You also want to think about what makes the most sense for your movie. Is it a theatrical film? Or is it a film that's better suited for an Apple, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, an SVOD platform? What I've seen from my experience is that independent films that are critically acclaimed movies definitely make sense for theatrical distribution. Because people that will generally go see independent art house films are looking for films that have, a very high score on Rotten Tomatoes and things that the critics are raving about. Whereas independent films that may cater to specific audiences, but for whatever reason may not be as critically acclaimed, those films can find large audiences, maybe even larger audiences than the theatrical distributor can reach on an SVOD service. And a lot of films that I've made recently have been films that have fit into that category and have been made on Netflix for specific target audiences. A lot of which, as I mentioned earlier, were Sundance Labs projects, and also films that with lower budgets and films by first-time feature directors, and those films reached massive audiences worldwide on Netflix, which is a really great feeling for me as a producer and for the filmmaker. So you really want to think about where is your film best suited when you're going through that sales process. And also keeping in mind which distributors have released and marketed films that are similar to yours by budget, range, size, and scope. And has that particular distributor been very lucky in finding a film's core audience that's similar to yours? That should also go into your decision about which distributor is right for your project. And finally, foreign sales. This is just something to think about, but when you're making movies, the bigger the movie gets, the more well-known an actor may be that's in your film. You can explore the foreign sales marketplace, which are markets that happen a lot of times alongside alongside film festivals such as Cannes, Toronto, Berlin, where international buyers come to buy the rights for films that have not been made yet based off of the people that are attached to a movie. And that can help you supplement your budget in terms of putting the financing together for a film. So it's not done a lot for films that are lower budgeted movies, but it is still something to be aware of in the case that you end up happening to get an actor who's well known on an independent film, which does happen from time to time. We are in an ever-changing marketplace, and I will definitely say that, consider the streamers now in the same way that you're considering standard theatrical distributors, because independent films are being consumed by large groups of people worldwide on those streamers. And I've learned that firsthand over the last 3 years. And I've made films that have been VOD releases with limited theatrical, films that have had wide releases, and films that have been SVOD releases on Netflix. So I've seen it all, and mostly in regards to films that have been lower budget and first-time feature directors' movies. And so I feel confident in what I say about it's important to make sure that you really think about who your audience is and what the best way is to get to them, so the maximum amount of people see your film. So with that being said, we've got about 25 minutes left, and I want to spend about 15 minutes with Sheldon, who I'm going to introduce. Sheldon Candace is the writer-director of a film called Love, L-U-V, which premiered at Sundance in 2012. Since then, Sheldon has gone off to write scripts for some of the major studios, as well as having a prolific career in the short form space, and is gearing up to go make his second feature film. I produced Love for Sheldon. We're both from Baltimore, Maryland. We met each other through a colleague at USC Film School, which is where we both went to school. And before Sheldon comes on, we're going to show the trailer for his film Love. And if you haven't had an opportunity to see it, it is available, I believe, on Netflix and iTunes. But here's the trailer.
There's two types of people in this world: owners and renters.
What you gonna do? I'm the man. You were scared. I knew it.
Baltimore's a beautiful city, man. I'm about to get this restaurant business jumping on. Welcome home, man.
Your mother loves you. She's just trying to work some stuff out.
You gonna give me a ride to school today?
You do all your homework?
Yep.
And I got you.
Is that supposed to be Jesus? Jesus ain't black.
Mine is.
Where you going? I gotta go to school.
You with me today. First things first, we gotta get you fresh.
We got to put you in some fine threads.
A man over there watching us.
Let him look. Every man needs to know how to drive. And move back, man.
Making a drop today. Handle this for me.
I thought you was trying to be our businessman and stuff.
Gotta trust me, what? I'm gonna take care of us.
You're well dressed on the outside, Vincent. But what about the inside?
Man, can you make this quick, y'all?
Did you think maybe you are not sent here to get the money?
Get the gun, Willie! Come on!
Life will make you lose your mind.
People I thought I trusted.
And I don't wanna close my eyes.
All he care about is money.
You are clearly here for me.
He ain't thinking about you.
Can I trust you?
I'm all you got. You can't let them see fit. I love you, bro.
Awesome. So that trailer totally still such an amazing trailer. I love that trailer.
Yeah.
So Sheldon, welcome to Collab, and thank you for joining. And what I wanted to ask you, Sheldon, is you've always been very entrepreneurial in your approach to achieving things in your life, and specific to love. What was your entrepreneurial approach to putting that movie together? And also, why did it make sense to be the first feature film that you directed?
Yeah, when I was in film school at USC, you would go to a lot of Q&As where successful directors would come into classes, or I would find movie screenings around town, and you often would hear writers and filmmakers say, write what you know. And you hear it time and time again, and then you realize that each of us, we've all been through a journey in life, and the best thing that you can offer yourself as an artist is to write from your heart, write from your experience. And for me, being a kid growing up in Baltimore, at a very, very young age, I had this relationship with my uncle that many nights felt very cinematic to me. And even as a young age, I was like, why does this feel a lot like the movies I'm seeing every Sunday with my parents in a theater? So I think that's super, super important. And Sundance is one of the greatest places at identifying when people truly write from their experience. And I just want to say really quickly, when the person asked about the entertainment lawyer, one of the best things you can do is go to the festivals and get into the different mixer parties. And there are always attorneys that are around, and just get someone's card, get their email, and just immediately follow up with them after a film festival. And hopefully you have some type of short film that you produced or directed or wrote. And attorneys are really, really great at championing new voices. And then I think, Jason, the second part of your question in terms of the entrepreneurial spirit, I think it's just like really important to talk to as many people as possible. Because, talk to assistants, talk to people in the camera department, whatever aspect of the industry that you're coming up in, build those relationships, because those will be the very people who literally champion you to make your first film. And so for me, I just, when I was in film school at USC, film school was so expensive, I would be a production assistant on music video and commercial sets. Any job I could get, I would go work. And then over time, I would just build relationships with everyone on set. So when it came time for me to make a new short film, I knew the gaffer who had his own generator. And because he liked me, because I was Sheldon, the PA, who always helped out the grips and gaffers, then he helped me on my short film. So I just can't say enough of how important those relationships are. And so then it comes to my relationship with Jason. you have to find a producer who's going to champion your cause as a first-time director. And that's either going to be a well-established producer, or it's going to be a producer who's just as hungry as you are trying to get your first movie made. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sheldon, what else I would say, like in specific to like love in actually this film, why did you make this your first movie?
It came from, like I said, once again, a very personal space and a part of my childhood that I felt that I always knew was a really, really wonderful story. And Jason, you'll remember this. There was a time when there was a much, much bigger version of love, and we wanted to make this huge movie, but I always knew at the core of it, it was an emotional love story between a boy and his uncle. And so I always knew that we could make it really, really tight and succinct, and it would give me an opportunity to make my first film, because you have to really be honest with yourself and say, you know, is someone really going to give me $10 million for my first movie? Are they even going to give me $5 million? Are they even going to give me $3 million? So how can I write myself an opportunity? And that's where it came down with love, of knowing that, okay, I can hold on to the core of what the emotion of the film is and still make a really beautiful cinematic film for a very, very shoestring or small budget. And I think what's very important too is developing relationships with actors. You know, I had developed a relationship with Russell Hornsby, who's in the film, you know, back when I was in film school, and he was someone that I would see and I would talk to. And I think that it's very important that a part of your entrepreneurial spirit is knowing the strength of relationships and building them over time. Like when you have the ear or the attention of someone in the industry, don't immediately try to capitalize on that encounter, but actually build that relationship over time. And also know that no is just no for now. And know that you need to hear 1,000 no's to get one yes. And just know the more that you're hearing no, which is very hard for us in the human condition because we're emotional, we don't like rejection, but just know that if you continue to hear no, you're getting closer to your yes, because that means that you're proactive in being determined to make it happen. And that's super, super important. You know, like for example, we had sent Commons reps Love about a year and a half before, and they said no. Well, we went back again, and then they said yes. So often know that no is just no for now, but no can very easily turn into a yes. And the other last thing that I'll really say that's important in terms of being a writer director and making these indie films is write something that you know an actor wants. Write something that you know an actor needs. And so at the end of the day, if you write something truly from your heart that is emotional and that is captivating, and then you're able to access an actor who's not getting that opportunity to present that part of their ability, then you're headed definitely in the right path. For example, Dennis Haysbert is in our film Love, and Dennis is a wonderful actor. And I always wondered, like, well, Dennis is selling insurance in Allstate commercials, but I remember him as the wheelman from Heat. I remember him in Far From Heaven. He's a wonderful actor. So I knew if we wrote a really great role for him, and then you have to have a producer like Jason who has savvy and has the ability to navigate to get the script to the talent. That's also another big part of a producer too that necessarily a director can't do, is a producer has the ability to get the script in front of talent, which is huge. It's very, very hard for you as a writer director to just get actors material unless you've built a relationship with them. But even still, I have actors who have gone on to become very successful, and we're very close. And when I want to send them something, it's always like they always send it through their managers or their agents because, you know, they're the people guiding their careers. So, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sheldon, do you have anything you want to ask me about the other side of love, the financing side?
Yes, I do. So I think one of the toughest things for an independent producer is the whole cat and mouse game of getting the talent and getting the money. And this becomes the toughest thing. So Jason, I think it's really important to share with the group, how are you playing that dance? How does that all come together, and how have you learned, and how has it been different on your different movies, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Good question. I would say that, you know, it's always been about trying to get on the financing side, you know, even one person to just, you know, make a soft commitment for some piece of financing. So let's say you have $1 million movie. If you can find that one champion to say, you know what, I'll give you $100,000 or $200,000. No, you don't actually need that money in the bank account, but it's somebody that actually says that to you, that's reputable and means something to the industry. You can then utilize that to go out to other people and say, you know, I've got my first money in. And that generally helps people feel more confident. Other investors, as well as agents who represent actors, because it means that the project has been validated. And I will say that, you know, having a project through the labs at Sundance or Film Independent or IFP, those also help add validation to projects too, for financing and to agents. So I would say a lot of these early projects that I've produced, I tried to either get them, you know, hope that they were supported by a top level arts organization, or there was some type of first money in. Or, you know, you had an agent that was really championing a script that even if the movie did not have its financing in place or a first investor in, they were still willing to send it out to an actor to maybe get an actor attached. So there's multiple different ways to do this per project. It's either by, you know, knowing that you've got a great relationship with a representative that represents somebody who is willing to attach themselves to a script without financing, finding that first investor that's willing to give you a small commitment to the movie that you can then utilize to share that with other people to raise additional financing and share it with agents who represent actors. You know, having just not being on the, you know, on the 1 yard line, and at least maybe being on the 10-yard line in any type of way possible on a project by adding some type of value to it, which can also be being supported by, you know, a top level arts organization. That stuff just helps. It helps get you out of the gate. It helps bring a little bit of interest. And then you've just got to be really creative in how you continue to catalyze that additional interest in the project.
Yeah, I think Jason just hit it on the head. For everyone starting out, for me, it was the Film Independent Labs that really vetted and supported me, that really pushed me through to the next level after film school. And this whole idea of no, once again, like, you have to be doing everything in your power to make it harder for people to say no. So I made a new short film. I created a lookbook. You know, I did all of these things that, you know, we had worked for years on the script. Jason, I have another question for you. What do you think is the greatest lesson you've learned from the very first movie you produced going into your next films?
The greatest lesson that I've learned from the first movie that I produced, I would say, that's a tough one. I mean, I've learned a lot. I mean, I've learned a lot. I would definitely say one of the things is how to continue to react calm under pressure. That's definitely been that you definitely learn over time. You know, how to be a better facilitator of communication between the art side and the finance side, and how to manage both better. I think that you continually learn that on all films, but I would say you definitely learn that the hardest on the first film. And also the biggest thing I would say too is how to make sure that talent feel taken care of on movies. That's also really important. When you first start out, you're always about that bottom line dollar. And then as you kind of get a little more into it, you realize you want to make those actors feel good. And if you have to spend a little bit more to do that on an independent film, that goes a long way in what they give you each day on set. So, and then also just how to deal better with creative investors. That process I learned, that process constantly gets refined.
Yeah. And I would say to everyone who's producers who are on board and everyone who's in this conversation, one thing that I've learned the most from being a production assistant to being in the AD department to then later, fortunately, thankful to be a director is, the best producers keep all of the chaos of the production away from the director and the actors, especially the actors. And that's what I've learned all the way from when I PA'd $1 million Nike commercial to being a director on my first film is that there literally can be an alien invasion in the middle of your set. The directors and the actors should have no idea about it. To keep that creative space sacred is super important.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Yeah. So we have about 6 minutes left. Does anybody have any final questions for Sheldon or myself?
Hi, we have so many questions. I'm just going to mention to folks, I think we'll put something up about this on the chat. We have on Collab something called the Advisor Q&A, where every twice a month we have people from the Sundance community come on the site and answer your burning questions. And this one this month is Howard Gertler, who's another really seasoned indie producer. So questions that aren't getting answered here, which are going to be several, you can feel free to throw up in that section of the site, the Advisor Q&A, and Howard will answer them as well. I have a question for you guys, and I'm gonna maybe get one more from the Q&A, but you talk so much about relationships. How did you two know you wanted to work together? How did you know your relationship was gonna work when you met?
Well, when you meet somebody else from Baltimore, there's an instant bond with somebody. But honestly, I work extremely hard. I feel like I've been someone who things have never come easy for. And I think the same goes for Jason. And the thing that I identified and love so much about Jason is that he refuses to give up. And to me, I think that's just super important is when you find people who match your light and your energy, that's when you find those people, you don't let them go. So, yeah.
So why don't we ask for our last question, Adrian Zuniga, to come on audio if possible. And let us know where you're coming from too.
Hey, this is Adrian. I'm in London at the moment. How are you guys? So my question, can you hear me okay?
Yes, you can hear you great.
Always have to ask that. I just wondered, how do you determine your film's budget? And do you start with sort of a maximum minimum and then you sort of squeeze into a hard and fast number eventually, or does that change depending on investors or interest, or how could you just speak to that in general, I guess?
Yeah, I would say that you try to, for me, I try to, on these independent films, always try to figure out what's the smallest amount that we can make it for, and still be able to deliver on the director's vision in full. And also being cognizant of what the current marketplace is for films and who the talent is that's attached. And really just trying to utilize all those factors to figure out what budget makes the most sense, again, to deliver on creative, but also to make sure that you're going to set yourself up for success. And so it's considering tons of different factors. And then for me as a producer, I make that personal judgment because obviously I'm the one that has to sell it to the investors and look them in the eye if the movie doesn't recoup. And so I've got to feel confident in that number, and that just comes with experience.
Cool, thanks.
Well, folks, this has been like the most information-packed 3 hours. We are so, I can't even, my mind is blown. We're so, so lucky. I'm sorry to those of you whose questions we didn't get to, but again, there's opportunities to get those answered on the site. And, you know, if Jason feels passionately about any of them, maybe he'll email me some answers I can share with y'all. Just want to ask you to stick around for a couple more minutes for some very important announcements. First of all, again, thank you so much, Jason and Sheldon, for your candor and incredible insights. And thank you all for being here. The recording of this is for those of you who've purchased the class will be on the Collab site soon on the class page. You'll just go back to the class page and be able to watch the recording. Also, a couple other events on the site that you might be interested in. April 10th is the deadline to apply for our 8-week interactive live online creative producing course, which is basically, I mentioned at the top of class, it's going to go into greater depth on everything Jason covered today and more. The instructor for that class is the amazing Pam Koffler from Killer Films, who's produced some of the most celebrated indies from the last 20 years, including Boys Don't Cry and Kids and Hedwig and the Angry Inch. And as mentioned, we have a discount code for those of you who've taken this class. It's producing20. And I believe Amani put that up in the chat for you. The discount code is producing20. And that discount code producing20 will also get you a 20% off an annual Collab All Access subscription, which gives you every one of these master classes like Jason's for a year, and among other benefits. And our next masterclass will also be relevant to many of you on Thursday, April 18th from 10 to 1 Pacific is Own Your Voice, Pitch and Present with Confidence, as I have just done. We will have public speaking expert Jackie Miller sharing proven communication techniques you can deploy to build your confidence and enhance your presence for the many public pitches, networking events, and presentations required at every level of our business. You can find details of those classes in the online courses section of the Collab site. Once again, I want to thank Jason and our support team backstage, Jason, other Jason, Imani, Candace, Kelly, and Ryan. And thank all of you for being here. Jason, do you have any last words to throw them out into the wild world of producing?
Yeah, no, thank you guys so much. This was a lot of fun. And I would just say continue pursuing your dreams. Don't give up. Be passionate, persistent, and persevere. And if you keep at it, you will succeed. I firmly believe that. So good luck to everybody and thank you. And Sheldon, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
See you all on Collab.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.